Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, welcome to our panel session at the Nature City Forum on equitable access to nature. My name is Genevieve LaRouche. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'm going to be giving a brief introduction to the issue. Then I'm going to be introducing our three panelists, and then I'll be handing it over to them. And then we'll be talking about their presentations afterwards. So please feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions, and we can pose them to them afterwards. And also there is a poll in the right-hand side on the chat. So let me start off by saying that equitable access to nature is a big issue. I thought I knew a lot about it, and then I started researching the issue, and I realized that there's a lot more I didn't know, and importantly, there's a lot of new research going on. The Center for the New American Politics put out a study about this that gives us a lot of hard data, and it shows that 74% people of communities of color live in nature-deprived areas, and that's compared with 23% of white communities. And corresponding with that is that 70% of low-income communities across the nation lived in these nature-deprived areas. This lack of access to nature, nature-deprived areas, unfortunately has a long history in the United States. It started with colonization. That came up in some of our the forums earlier today with the keynote speaker. And it dates back to then there was discrimination of Native Americans, then forced migration, forced segregation, exclusion from national parks, up until today, where we get into issues like redlining, other discriminatory practices, and then up till things like that happened recently in Central Park with a black birder feeling threatened, or being threatened rather. And of course, this has been exacerbated by the corona pandemic. So we're really lucky to have with us three fantastic speakers. The first one I'm going to introduce is someone I know from my own work, is Chantel Jimenez, coming to us from the West Coast. She is the Urban Refuge Coordinator of the SoCal Urban National Wildlife Refuge Program in San Diego, California. She received her degree from Oregon State University in Fisheries and Wildlife with an emphasis on environmental education. She's passionate about connecting people in living areas to the outdoors and providing opportunities for them to connect to nature. The next person is someone else I've had a chance to work with, and that's Gabby Roth. I love working with Gabby. She's the manager of equity and community engagement at the Chesapeake Conservancy, where she works in partnership with the National Park Service, Chesapeake Bay Gateways Network to promote inclusive stewardship in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Gabrielle leads initiatives focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for the Conservancy. Prior to working at the Chesapeake Conservancy, Gabrielle worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, building urban partnerships and community engagement programs in Kansas City and Denver, as well as with the National Aquarium in Baltimore. Gabrielle has the expertise in areas of partnership and capacity building, community engagement, and creative placemaking. She takes a multidisciplinary and intersectional approach to environmental issues and community outreach through nature, art, and storytelling to authentically build community. Our third panelist is Rose Brusaferro. Born in Philadelphia and raised in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, Dr. Brusaferro received a PhD in sustainability education from Prescott College in 2020. Her 10-year career in environmental education began at Irvine Nature Center in Baltimore County, where she studied children's environmental literacy. From there, she went on to investigate the sustainability of nature play spaces during her environmental science master's program at Towson University. Her doctoral research is a case study of ecological identity indicators in children enrolled at Wild Haven Forest Preschool. So we're really lucky to have these three panelists. I'm going to hand it over first to Chantel. And like I said, please enter your questions in the Q&A.
Awesome, Genevieve. real excited to be part of this Nature City Forum. I'm going to share, I have a short PowerPoint presentation and then potentially a video if time allows. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. So, like Genevieve said, my name is Chantel Jimenez. I am the Urban Refuge Coordinator for the SoCal Urban Wildlife Refuge Program. And I was asked to be the first panelist on this, or speaker for this panelist, because I'm going to give a little bit of broad background as a federal entity for the Fish and Wildlife Service working on wildlife refuges. Some of the challenges that we face and how there's been a real shift in the way that we look about engaging communities and providing equitable access to the outdoors comparative to, how we've been doing it in the past. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is the entity that manages the National Wildlife Refuges, and this is their mission. Broadly, it's to conserve, protect fish and wildlife and their plants, habitats, for the continuing benefit of the American people. And for a long time on national wildlife refuges, there was a real struggle in terms of how do we do that first part, the conserve, protect, and enhance, and also sort of that engaging the American people. And a lot of our national wildlife refuges in the past were closed to the public because they really felt like you couldn't have the public and do the beginning at the same time. There was a point where the National Wildlife Refuge's slogan was wildlife first. And, that is sort of the mission, but what does that tell the American public when you say wildlife first? And so there's this challenge in sort of the work that we do and how we do it for the American people. And so in 97, the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act established these 6 what they called priority public uses. These were the things that you were allowed to do on national wildlife refuges if they were compatible with the mission of that refuge. And these are great if you do these things. If you don't do these things, it potentially creates a barrier because you don't see yourself on a wildlife refuge. And everything from picnicking to dog walking to mountain biking, all of the sort of other things that people do in the outdoors were not allowed to be done on national wildlife refuges. And so these barriers of, here's what you're allowed to do on our refuge, come to our refuge, you have to come and visit us, really set up these barriers to have all feel welcome and safe on our national wildlife refuges. Since then, a lot has changed since 1997, and recognizing that the wildlife refuges across the nation needed to figure out a way to build from the foundation, but look at the future. And how are we going to remain relevant into the future? The demographics of our country from 97 are changing and continue to change. People are shifting from suburban and rural areas back into urban areas. And what they do in the outdoors is shifting. Not as much hunting and fishing. I know fishing's gone up a little bit recently, but that sort of traditional outdoors, those priority uses that we allowed on our refuge, not as many people are doing those. And more people are going bird watching, they're hiking, they're mountain biking. The social media platforms and how that communication tool has expanded people's reach into the outdoors and how they can see themselves in the outdoors in a non-traditional way has expanded. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service saw all these happening and really wanted to figure out, well, how are we going to remain relevant with these kind of things happening in our cultures, in our societies, in our communities? And from that, the Conserving the Future, the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program developed. And this was looking at and focusing really in urban areas to engage the public where the people are living, to engage the demographic that our country is leaning to into the future. And by recognizing that, they put their money where their mouth is, and they invested millions of dollars into urban national wildlife refuges. And ours in San Diego, being the SoCal Urban National Wildlife Refuge Program, received money in 2014 to start to figure out, well, how are we going to do things differently to engage the communities surrounding our refuge to help them meet their needs, working with local partners for meaningful community engagement. Not the, here's what you can do here, you have to come and visit us, have fun on our refuge, but more of a looking beyond the boundaries of how do we work with people where they are, and how do we engage with them strategically to meet their needs. So what we're doing here in Southern California is using the money that we received to work with partners. And all of our partners have different missions, different goals that they're trying to achieve, all related around the outdoors. Some might be like Outdoor Outreach. It's a positive youth development organization that uses the outdoors to address mental health of high school kids and how they can see themselves in the outdoors through recreation, through surfing, through paddleboarding, and how that helps to build resiliency, how it builds a safety of people that look like you, that live in your community, going to the outdoors. And it's a stepping stone in the sense of, hey, we're going to use the outdoors to help you be a better person. And then from there, it's going to grow into this passion for the outdoors, a sharing of the outdoors, and a love for the outdoors that you then advocate for the outdoors. Another one of our partners is Ocean Connectors, and this is a more traditional environmental education kind of program. But instead of us paying for a bus and having the communities surrounding the refuge come to our refuge, we've decided to work with Ocean Connectors to go to them. And the picture on the right is Paradise Creek. It's a tidal salt marsh that feeds into the National Wildlife Refuge. And you have low-income housing on the right-hand side. You have an elementary school at the top. And we worked with Ocean Connectors to really focus on this particular location because this is that community's outdoor space. The refuge may only be 2 miles away from this location, but 90% of the people that we've been working with didn't even know the refuge was there. So this provides us an opportunity to engage them where they are, to do habitat restoration with the kids, to then have family and community events out here, to bring different partners together to really show that nature in the outdoors isn't this national park or national wildlife refuge completely out of your neighborhood, but it's right here. You know, I'm always saying that we're trying to work with communities and honor refuge and provide them their refuge with a little r. This is their refuge. This is where they're able to see great blue herons and egrets and ducks right outside the backyard. And they don't have to take a bus. They don't have to, they can just walk out the school grounds. So, and then our other partner, Thrive Outside, this is a collective group coming together for all of San Diego County. The Thrive Outside Communities is a project through the Outdoor Foundation, which is funded by the Outdoor Initiative, Outdoor Retailers Group, to invest communities to do a sort of collective impact. So bringing tons of partners together, everything from YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, to federal entities, to really provide engaged, repeat and reinforce outdoor programming. So from everything from positive youth development to mental health to environmental education. So this collective has come together and received funding to look at how do we ensure that the barriers to access to outdoor engagement are removed in San Diego. And that's working with the Parks and Recreation Department in the city to create equitable parks, meaning that if this park is in your neighborhood, you can't count that as an outdoor space if there's gang violence and the playground structure's breaking down and the basketball court's broken. How do we make sure that there's equitable opportunities throughout San Diego County for the communities that we support? And this is kind of how we framed it within that Thrive Outside group is outdoors for all, outdoors for health, and outdoors forever. So often the federal government is like, you have to do this on our wildlife refuges, you have to come to us. But with our SoCal program and through the Thrive, we've really sort of flipped the switch in the sense that we want you to find the outdoors and go to the outdoors for what you want in the outdoors. And that passion, that engagement will then lead to a love, advocacy, work for us, or a nonprofit to engage more in the outdoors. But these three, outdoors for all, outdoors for health, and outdoor forever, a lot of this collective partners see themselves in it. You got the traditional environmental education, you got the mental health, you got people advocating for equitable access. And it's very community focused. We targeted the communities and we're very intentional with the communities that we work with. Collaborative, that again, it's a conversation to facilitate how we all can meet each other's needs and not just, the federal government saying you have to do this. And again, there's a real focus on inclusiveness. Through the SoCal program, we have been able to do some evaluation. And I threw this slide up there just as a placeholder, just so we have a lot of metrics within our program that we've been able to measure. But one of the things that we're really trying to do is capture changes in values, behaviors, and attitudes. We have the pre-post traditional increased knowledge, but we're working with a professional evaluator to how do we measure that we're changing behaviors? And this is one of the questions that I really hone in on in the presentations is, when we talk about something that we're passionate about it. And this question of how often do you share or talk about nature to your friends and family, we see an increase from pre-post of the participants in our program talking about nature more, talking about the outdoors. And for us, that really shows a change in behavior, a change in how much they value the outdoors, that they're able then, or they want to talk to their friends and family about it. So this is one of the things that we're really taking and showing with others, that it is we're seeing a shift in the work that we're doing in the communities that we're serving and how they see themselves in nature. And so that's my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing that. And bring up the slides and see what time it is. And then I'll stop there. If I have some time at the end, I'll play a really great video. But if not, I can share the link about one of our participants who is great and sort of summarizes what the work we've been doing from the beginning to end. So I'm all done, Genevieve.
Okay, thank you, Chantel. I'm going to hand it off now to Gabrielle Raw.
Hi, everyone. Let me just try to share my screen so I can pull up my slides. My name's Gabrielle, or Gabby. Most people know me as Gabby. I am the manager of equity and community engagement at Chesapeake Conservancy. We are a nonprofit based out of Annapolis, Maryland. I'm also a partnership staff with National Park Service, so a lot of the work that I do is in tandem with National Park Service Chesapeake Bay office goals. So I wanted to talk today about some of the programs that I've been helping to lead, and thank Chantal for the work that you're doing out in California that urban wildlife refuge initiative is really what got me started in a big part of my career. Like Genevieve said in my bio, I was helping to build some of those urban wildlife refuge programs in Denver and Kansas City, and learning across the country, understanding the unique ways that people are connecting to the environment and the different ways that they care for it, which is often very different than the more traditional environmental community trope of what environmentalism looks like. So a lot of what I do in my work is trying to challenge the white dominant narrative of environmentalism, and doing so by authentically connecting to communities, because at the end of the day, we are all interconnected and we all have a relationship to nature because we are a part of nature. And so when I came to the Conservancy about 3 years ago, I was really excited about the entrepreneurial spirit of our organization and our ability to try new things and to kind of break down barriers that might get in the way for creating the future of what the environmental movement is. And so one of the goals that we have, which is in alignment with the goals of the Biden administration, is preserving 30% of the Chesapeake Bay watershed by 2030. So we're doing that in a variety of ways, but as a manager of equity and community engagement, a big part of what I'm trying to do is make sure that underrepresented communities, specifically communities of color, environmental justice communities, low-income communities, are connected to planning efforts from the start. Because as Genevieve mentioned in her introduction, there's a huge disparity between access to quality green space and those communities. So one of the projects that I helped lead is a bilingual interpretive outreach initiative with the Maryland State Parks. And this is a partnership with Maryland Park Service, Maryland Coastal Management Zone, and the National Park Service as well. And it all kind of started in 2015. We had a Latino heritage intern through the Hispanic Access Foundation who did a visitor use study at Sandy Point State Park, which is one of the only public access sites to the water on the Chesapeake Bay outside of Annapolis. It's right before the Bay Bridge, as you can see in the photo there. And in this visitor use study, they found that 80% of the visitors identified as Spanish speaking, so Hispanic or Latino. And only 3% of those users even knew that there was a nature program happening on a daily basis, that there was a nature center. They were really utilizing the park in a different way than traditional white park users, or what used to be traditional park users would use the park for. So for example, the parks 20, 30 years ago were used to people coming in and hiking and biking for a few hours and then leaving. And they have this leave no trace principle. Our Maryland parks are trash free. And so that was a big part of the park culture. And about 10, 15 years ago, as we see a big influx of immigrants coming in from Latin American countries, the park usage is changing quite a bit. And specifically at Sandy Point State Park and a lot of other water-based parks, they're seeing high Spanish-speaking visitorship, where big families will come spend the entire day and barbecue and picnic and bring their hammocks. And, you know, at Sandy Point, people were even coming on the weekends and doing baptisms in the water. And that was a big shift for the park system because they really needed to understand this new community and engage with the community. And what we found is that there was a big gap between the users and who was being engaged at the park. So we came in as the Conservancy, and I was able to find a pot of money to hire 2 bilingual interpretive outreach assistants in 2019. So I hired 2 young gentlemen from the Latino community, and they were stationed at Sandy Point State Park to really start to understand the community that was there. We knew the demographics of the community. We knew that they weren't being reached. So we tried to understand, what are the barriers to engaging with the community, and why haven't the park staff been able to do so this far? And some of the big challenges that the park staff were dealing with were issues around trash, specifically hot coals. There were, dumpster fires happening because people were throwing hot coals into the dumpsters, and people were leaving their trash around because the truth is that the communication in the park was not great. There were no signs in Spanish. Nobody on staff spoke Spanish. And so there was a big knowledge gap, and it was hard to assume that people would just understand the unspoken rules of a park because they're not as culturally relevant. And there's a big issue around access and equity and inclusion and safety in parks. A lot of folks might not feel safe in parks because of historical issues that have occurred. A lot of the communities don't trust park rangers because they are dressed in uniform and have badges, and that gives them an idea that perhaps this is an officer of the law. And so there's this feeling of unsafety there. There's also a big lack of communication around regulations. So one of the statisticians at Maryland Park Service found that most of the fishing citations had the last names that were Hispanic last names. And that's because there weren't any resources on how to get a fishing license in Spanish. And so with all of these barriers around language, racism, fear, and other physical barriers, they were having a lot of trouble connecting to the community. So we were able to hire 2 bilingual rangers who went into the parks wearing t-shirts, going around speaking Spanish and connecting with the community, developing culturally relevant programming that would connect to the community. So using art and music and crafts to connect to the community that was at the park. So they kind of went beyond the traditional environmental programming that you might see at a nature center. And from there, we started to understand that there needed to be a lot of changes at the park. So we helped to develop some signage at the parks that helped to explain some of the cultural nuances of some of the, restrictions at the park. So for example, a lot of people were putting hammocks on the old trees and the young trees, which was starting to kill the trees with so much hammock use. But instead of putting up a sign that says, no, do not put a hammock here, we developed some signage that told the stories of the trees and explained the why behind why we don't want to put hammocks on the trees to help conserve the trees for the health of the community and for the health of everyone at the park. So a lot of what we've been doing at the parks is helping to bridge those gaps between the staff that works at the park and also between the community. And, we have kind of a great issue at the Maryland Parks so that they are filling up at, 10 a.m. on holidays and weekends, and people are actually being turned away from the parks. And so we're trying to understand too, where else can we send people? If folks are driving an hour or 2 hours away from their home in order to visit a park and to access the water and to engage with nature, then where else can we send them? What's another nearby park that might not be as populated so that we can send them to still enjoy nature in the outdoors? And it's also about understanding the institutional barriers and the cultural competency of our organizations and our park services that are majority white, and understanding how to kind of build up the cultural competency or cultural humility and remove some of the institutional barriers that we have in place that prevent us from connecting to the communities, because it's not all about speaking Spanish. you can connect to the communities even if you don't speak the language. And there are inclusive ways that you can do that. And so we're trying to educate the park staff. And we're doing that now by expanding this program from one state park, which was Sandy Point. Now we're in 9 state parks this summer. And it's super important over COVID, especially because park visitation has seen a huge increase. For example, Patapsco Valley State Park, which is really close to Baltimore. It's in Howard County. Their peak visitation before COVID was 1.6 million, and over COVID, their peak visitation was 2.7 million. But that's just the numbers of people who they are counting in their parking lots, and they think that it's actually more around 7 million users because parking is a big issue capacity-wise. So we're trying to now understand and work with our partners so that they can effectively meet the needs of the Latinx communities and build strong relationships with communities. And a big part of that is looking inwards to make sure that we and the organizations are capable of appreciating the cultural differences of different cultures and different communities and how they're connecting to nature, because it doesn't all look the same. And stewardship really means different things to different people, people of diverse backgrounds, faith, education. Stewardship doesn't really look one way. And so a big part of what we're trying to do at the Conservancy and National Park Service, and now with this bilingual interpretive outreach program, is redefining what environmentalism looks like, that stewardship doesn't have one look, it doesn't have one lens, and really having the next leaders of the environmental movement, so these young people in the communities being represented in the parks and in our communities, and then breaking down the barriers within our organizations that are maybe preventing them from joining our organizations. And so that's where a lot of the internal work comes as an individual and internally as an organization, changing our institutional systems and structures to break down those barriers. Because ultimately we're all connected to nature, and we really want to be able to provide the opportunities for everyone to connect to nature in their unique ways. So that is what I've got for my presentation. Hopefully I was good on time, Genevieve. Happy to answer.
You're doing great. We're going to hold questions until the end. Thank you very much, Gabby. Great talk. Rose, you're on now.
Oh, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you some really quick. I'm going to be really quick. My name is Rose Brucifero, and I am the Environmental Education Program Specialist at Backyard Base Camp. I just wanted to use this introduction to explain to you our positionality as an organization. And that way you can understand the context of how we're involved in increasing access to green space. The photo you're looking at was taken by Sean Wallace for the February issue of Baltimore Magazine. You'll see Atia Wells here, the executive director. Jordan Bethia is our farm manager, and that's me down by the goats. Atia founded the nonprofit in 2019 because she was searching for nearby green space to enjoy with her children. And in Baltimore City, the only nature center we have is over on the west side. We live in the northeast. And so that is a 30-minute drive if you don't hit traffic and stoplights. So Atia was searching for green space and couldn't find it. But then on a Google search, she saw a patch of green space right next to her house. And so she went wandering into that green space, found that it was vacant, and then she started Bliss Meadows. But Backyard Base Camp is based in Frankford, Maryland, and Frankford is Baltimore City's largest neighborhood. This quote by George Washington Carver, "Start where you are with what you have," is really a founding mantra of Backyard Base Camp, because you have heard Chantel talking about finding the outdoors where you are in your own neighborhood and finding the outdoors for the reasons that you want to be outside. And then you heard Gabby say a lot of things about understanding and connecting to the community that you're in. So this idea of starting where you are with what you have is super important for us as an organization, because we do not want to pluck our urban children out of their comfort zone and drop them into green space somewhere far away from their homes, which may not be comfortable for reasons that I'll explain to you in a moment. So Backyard Base Camp is all about equitable access to green space in Baltimore City. If you know Lawrence Brown, he's the author of this book called The Black Butterfly. That is an examination of this phenomena in Baltimore City that I'll show you on the next slide. But Lawrence Brown describes equity work as an ongoing process in which we are actively doing more for communities that experience ongoing historical trauma. So please remember that. Equity work is actively doing more for the communities that experience ongoing historical trauma. Here is a map of Baltimore City's public green space on the left. You can see that on the west side, there is a lot of public green space. This park here, Gwynns Falls Leakin Park, is the third largest urban green space east of the Mississippi. It's 1,200 acres. And then Druid Hill Park is very large. And then over here where we are, where Backyard Base Camp is in the northeast, we have 375 contiguous acres of green space. And then this little dot right here is our green space at Bliss Meadows. It's called Barbara and Parkwood Park. And then over here on the right, this is another photograph of Baltimore City. And this shows you the different racial demographics that live in the city. The light green are African American populations. So this is an important map to look at, because this is an illustration of what Lawrence Brown calls the black butterfly. And it's also important, especially for Backyard Base Camp. One of the things, when I talk to white men in particular, who, when we talk about the concept of equitable access to green space, a lot of people like to tell me, it's not a black and white issue. It's a rural versus urban issue. And I stop and think to myself, well, that is a black and white issue. Rural versus urban is almost the same thing as saying black versus white, because as you heard from Genevieve in the beginning, Black people are concentrated in areas that are deprived of green space access. And that is because one of the fundamental things I think that everyone needs to try and learn when it comes to this topic that we're here for is the practice of redlining. And I'm sure many of you on the call already know, but in 1937, the Homeowners Loan Corporation made things called residential security maps. And that made it federally sanctioned to deny equitable access to private financial capital and spending on public goods. So these redlining maps would outline the predominantly Black neighborhoods in red, so that banks would not give out loans to buy in those neighborhoods, because they were considered by the banks and the loan organization to be less desirable and degraded and undeserving of financial and public goods support. So when people say rural versus urban, I wish that more people accepted the reality of redlining, because redlining gives white neighborhoods structural advantages. And in The Black Butterfly, Lawrence Brown describes really well how you can kind of see like two wings here. This is the black butterfly, and then in the middle, coming down and moving to the right, is considered the white L. In the white L, where there's no redlining and loans are approved much easier, white neighborhoods get structural advantages such as material wealth, land ownership, respectful policing, for example, access to capital, and high quality public goods. So when we're doing equity work, any kind of equity work, we need to accept the fact that there are structural advantages in place for people who are not minority groups. And because of those structural systems of oppression, Black and Brown communities experience historical trauma. And if we are doing equity work, we should actively be seeking out how to heal and get resources to those communities in particular. I could go on and on, but I'm going to move on. So Bliss Meadows is, we call it a 10-acre land reclamation project. Let me show you this first. So this is Bliss Meadows. In the front here, we have 2.5 acres of urban farmland. And then on 1/2 an acre sits our farmhouse. We grow produce, we have chicken coops, we have a goat pen, we have a meadow, we've got a fruit orchard, we've got honeybee hives, and we've got 2 ponds on the farm side. And then back here is 7 acres of abandoned forest patch. This is owned by the city of Baltimore. And because we became a Friends of Barbara and Parkwood Park group, you can see Barbara Ave and Parkwood Ave. This patch of green space is called Barbara and Parkwood Park. Because we are a Friends of group, we are able to steward the land. And my responsibility is to create this trail system you see, as well as an outdoor classroom and nature play spaces. So that kind of reiterates the 5 pillars that Bliss Meadows is seeking to serve, to be of service in terms of environmental justice. This should really be like an interconnected Venn diagram. So at Bliss Meadows, we approach environmental justice through animal husbandry. We want people in the city to know that, yes, they can grow, they can have livestock. So they can have their own chickens and have their own eggs. They can have their own goats and have their own milk. So we're here to demonstrate how you do that. What are the regulations? What kinds of red tape do you have to go through? And we'll teach you how to maintain your own animal husbandry program at home. We do environmental education, of course, but like Gabby was saying, we make sure that our environmental education is culturally responsive and relevant. So if we are going to invite the people in our neighborhood, which is predominantly Black, to come learn about seeds, then we are going to incorporate some of our history and some of our songs and music and art. And instead of just saying, yeah, plant this seed and this is the life cycle of the seed, we would start off with some sort of explanation of, you know, our ancestor braided these seeds into their hair so that they would make it over the Middle Passage, and we could have food for our communities when we came to this new place. And that, for Black and Brown communities, kind of strikes a nerve and makes us more interested in the environmental education that is being offered. We approach environmental justice through conservation efforts. One example is that we have green ash in those 7 acres of forest. And so we are doing some studies about the emerald ash borer. But we also do like bird surveys, bird banding, any kind of community conservation projects that that are brought up by our neighbors themselves. We oftentimes don't come up with our own ideas and assume that someone would like to do that. We go to the community and ask them what they would like to hear about or learn. And then we talk about community green space. So even though these 3 acres in the front are technically private property, it's zoned as community managed green space. So that means that anyone, anywhere can come walk on the property and use things like our garden beds, our little library, our ponds, and maybe in the future, they can do some rental. And then the last pillar is food access. So yes, we have a farm and we distribute the food to everyone around the block, but food access is more about food sovereignty, getting the people in our neighborhoods to learn how to grow their own food at home. So they can come to the farm and learn those skills, but then take them home and we'll give them things like seed kits. We have done produce distributions, so going door to door to hand out free 10-pound boxes of produce to all of the houses around us, and workshops about growing food to try and increase food sovereignty. So those are the 5 pillars and the 5 ways in which Bliss Meadows tries to address environmental justice. And the entire project of Bliss Meadows is an exercise in increasing equitable access to green space in an area where you can see is nearly a nature desert, if you will. These are just some partners. I'm not going to get into it because I want y'all to be able to ask questions if you have them. But I will say that the Chesapeake Bay Trust is working, well, we won a grant to build the outdoor classroom. We're working with our public school students who have done several design sessions and come on site to do design workshops with our landscape architects. So the public school students are the ones designing this outdoor classroom, which is super exciting for me. It's a dream come true. And yeah, that's why Baltimore City Public Schools are there. You can see BCRP down here, and Baltimore Green Space is an organization in the city that helps patches of green space sustain themselves. And then this is, if you want to email me, I'll put this in the chat box for everyone.
Thank you so much, Rose. Wow, we're so lucky. 3 fantastic presentations. We don't have a lot of time. I just want to mention that the themes I'm really seeing coming across is like this great commitment to creativity and working with your partners on that creativity. It seems like you're generating a lot of ideas. Your intentionality, you guys have figured out what's the most important things, and then you focus like a laser beam on those, very intentionally on those goals and values that are important to you. And then you're all, in your own different ways, your own different language, are meeting people where they are. And Rose, I really appreciated you bringing up the subject of trauma. I know that that's, super important, and I'm hoping some of the other sessions are going to be focusing on that more too. I'm going to start out with a question. It's directed at Rose, but I think we go to all of us. What can we get the city to focus on? How can we get the city to focus on historically disinvested parts of the city that do not have walkable parks and green spaces? Who would like to go first?
I just would like to, because this is what we're doing, The 7 acres of Barbara and Parkwood Park was donated to the city by Morris Goldsecker in 1976, and no one has touched it since then. But every time we go to the city and say, hi, we would like to put a trail system in the park, they imagine that it's already a developed park and they don't know that it's an abandoned green space. So my quick answer to this, so to give everyone else some time to say something, is that for us, the way to get the city to care about it was to keep on being a little bug in their ear. And it's been a 3 or 4 year process of continuously checking up and asking for communication and feedback. Another thing I'll say is that we have a partnership with the National Park Service. They have a Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program. And to have NPS in our corner advocating for us and asking the city to be responsive, that has helped a lot as well.
Gabby or Chantel? Anything to add? I have a question for you all. What brought you to this work, or why is equitable access to nature important to you? Gabby or Chantal, you want to start that one?
I can go ahead. I guess it all started as a kid, right? I had a lot of privilege as a child to be able to have access to the outdoors. My dad is from Mexico, and I grew up going to farm camp in Mexico every summer. And that was a really formative experience for me. And when I got to college, I started working for an environmental justice and immigration research organization in California, and really saw firsthand that disparity between communities and that ability to connect to nature. So for me, it's always been like this need to be able to connect those to nature who otherwise might not have the opportunity or the same equitable access. So it's been, since a kid, it's been something that I've been kind of wanting to do.
Chantel, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I would just sort of echo that in the sense that, I'm a kid from Los Angeles. And so my outdoors experiences were city parks, Griffith Park, the Los Angeles River. And so when I started working for the Fish and Wildlife Service and everyone told stories about these grandiose experiences in the outdoors that, I didn't have, it made me realize that there's a strong need to connect those with backgrounds like myself to outdoors that are more relevant and available and accessible to them.
And Rose?
Well, sorry. I will just say that I had been working in environmental education for 7 or 8 years before I met Atiya Wells. And when Tia came onto the scene and started the Bliss Meadows project, it became more pertinent that there wasn't as much representation from Black and Brown people in the environmental movement. Before I met Tia, I was just like assimilating my way through my career. And so I'm just try and be simple. It's the representation aspect for me that makes me want to do this hard social justice work.
Wow, really cool. I've got another question. Can anyone speak to barriers in working with state environmental agencies? I'm going to expand that to say to any environmental agencies and regulations, federal, state, with a highly white employee base while doing outreach and working with communities in your programs? Gabby, it looks like you want to say something. You're on mute, Gabby.
Hi, sure. I mean, have worked for a federal agency and only working for a federal agency for 6 months and then quitting my full-time permanent federal position. I think I understand firsthand what the barriers are. And I feel lucky to be able to work for a nonprofit right now where I can be nimble and I can also be the mentor and the manager that I always wished that I had, and help the folks who I work with feel included in the workplace, and help to raise the awareness of my organization around these issues, and around cultural humility, because I think that there's a really big disparity between the communities and then the systems and structures in place in these majority white agencies and organizations. And it comes down to empathy is what I'm finding. Empathy is a really necessary piece of this work, and kind of combating white supremacy culture as well in the workplace. So there's a lot of institutional barriers internally, externally with connecting to communities, but it's really important that when these agencies are trying to do this work, they're understanding why they're trying to do the work and looking internally first and foremost, not just as an institution, but on an individual basis, because inclusion is not what you do, it's who you are. It's something that's practiced with every part of your being.
You're so wise for someone so young. Rose or Chantel, anything to add there? Okay, I think I have so many more questions, but we are at the bottom of our session. It's at 12:31 already. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for being a great moderator, Genevieve.
Nice to see you all. Nice to meet you, Rose. I hope we'll be working together soon.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.